The sun beat down on cracked asphalt, heat waves distorting the air above East Side Avenue. This part of the city had long ago been forgotten by those with the power to change things. Graffiti-covered walls told stories of territorial claims, faded dreams, and simmering anger. Jayden leaned against the rusted railings of his apartment complex, a half-eaten bag of chips in one hand while the other scrolled through his phone. At 16, he'd already mastered the hard stare that kept most people at a distance. His crew, Marcus, DeShawn, and Trey, lounged nearby, their easy laughter masking the vigilance that came from growing up where respect was currency. "Yo, check this." Marcus nudged Jayden, nodding toward the building's entrance. A slender man in his 40s methodically unloaded cardboard boxes from an aging sedan. His movements were precise, economical, nothing flashy. The stranger paused, feeling their stares, and offered a brief nod. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable accent. DeShawn snickered. "Good afternoon," he mimicked, exaggerating the Canadian pronunciation. "Where you from, man? Up north where they ride moose to school?" The man smiled thinly. "Something like that." "Need help with those boxes, eh?" Trey joined in, drawing out the "eh," while the others laughed. "I appreciate the offer," the man replied, "but I've got it under control." He continued unloading, seemingly unbothered by their taunts. But Jayden noticed something, a momentary hardness in the man's eyes when DeShawn blocked his path to the door, something cold and calculating before it disappeared behind politeness. "Guys like him don't last a week here," Marcus muttered. "Too soft." Jayden watched as the Canadian efficiently navigated around DeShawn, carrying his boxes inside without confrontation. "Yo, I bet this dude ain't never been in a real fight before," Trey said, spinning his basketball on one finger. "Probably apologizes when someone steps on his foot." The crew laughed, but Jayden kept his eyes on the doorway where the man had disappeared. Something didn't add up. 3 days later, the crew gathered outside the Canadian's apartment, passing time in the narrow hallway with the flickering fluorescent light. "Watch this," DeShawn whispered, rapping his knuckles against the door in a rhythm designed to irritate. He pressed his ear against the wood, grinning. "I've been doing this at random times. Drives people crazy." The door swung open suddenly, causing DeShawn to stumble forward. The Canadian stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a gray t-shirt that revealed surprisingly defined forearms. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice level. Marcus stepped forward. "Just checking if you're settling in all right. Neighborhood welcome. Committee." "Yeah," Trey added. "We noticed your doormat's missing. People might think you're unwelcoming." The Canadian's gaze moved methodically from face to face. "I appreciate the concern." "What's your name anyway?" Jayden asked. "Michael," he replied. "Michael Hayes." "Hayes? That even a Canadian name?" DeShawn snickered. Michael's face remained neutral. "I should get back to unpacking." As he closed the door, Trey wedged his foot in the gap. "Wait up. We're just being friendly, right, guys?" That night, they escalated. Marcus spray-painted "Go Home Maple Syrup" across Michael's door while Trey kept watch. DeShawn swiped his welcome package from the building manager's office: mail, parking permit, community guidelines. The next morning, Michael emerged from his apartment, observed the graffiti without reaction, and calmly went to work with a cleaning, rag and solvent. He didn't report it, didn't complain. Later, they watched through the stairwell as he discovered his missing package. Instead of frustration, his expression showed only quiet assessment, like he was calculating something. Mrs. Winters from 4B shuffled past, her ancient chihuahua leading the way. She paused, eyeing the boys, then Michael. "You boys should find better hobbies," she muttered before turning to Michael. "And you, mister? You're not what you're pretending to be, are you?" Michael only smiled politely. "Ain't nobody this calm, unless they scared," Marcus declared, loud enough for Michael to hear. But for just a moment, the Canadian's eyes met Jayden's, and Jayden felt a chill. Those weren't the eyes of someone who was scared. Not at all. A week into Michael's residence, patience wore thin on both sides. The crew had exhausted their usual arsenal: noise complaints, petty vandalism, stolen mail, yet the Canadian remained, unruffled. "This guy's like a robot," DeShawn complained, kicking an empty soda can across the parking lot. Friday evening found them loitering by the building entrance when Michael returned from work, grocery bags in hand. His path to the door took him directly past their impromptu gathering. "Yo, Canada," Marcus called out. "We got a question for you." Michael paused, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes? Why'd you move here? Nobody moves to this neighborhood unless they're running from something." A muscle twitched in Michael's jaw. "Just looking for a change." Trey moved closer, invading Michael's space. "Nah, that don't work. People like you don't move to places like this for a change." For the first time, frustration flashed across Michael's face. "I'm just trying to live quietly." "Oh, he speaks." DeShawn laughed. "Got some emotions after all." Jayden watched Michael's hands, noticing how they tightened on the grocery bags. His knuckles were scarred in a way Jayden recognized, the telltale marks of someone who'd thrown punches that connected. The confrontation escalated when Trey reached for one of Michael's grocery bags. "Let me help you with that." What happened next occurred too fast for Jayden to fully process. Michael shifted his weight, barely moving, but suddenly Trey was pulling back an empty hand, wincing. "Don't," Michael said softly, the single word carrying more weight than any threat they'd ever heard. Something in his stance had changed. The carefully maintained facade of ordinary neighbor had slipped, revealing something coiled and dangerous underneath. His eyes were different now, focused, predatory, assessing threats and exits. "The hell was that?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward. Michael set his groceries down with deliberate care, hands now free. His posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Trey rubbed his wrist, backing away. "Yo, what the hell was that look?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as Michael's polite mask fell away completely, replaced by the cold gaze of someone who had seen and done things these kids couldn't. Imagine, no one moved. The air between them crackled with a tension so thick Jayden could practically taste it. Michael's transformation was subtle but undeniable. His stance wider, more grounded, his gaze sharper. "You boys think you know everything." Michael's voice had changed too, the polite Canadian lilt giving way to something harder, more clipped. "You see an accent, some manners, and you think, soft target. I get it." He took a single step forward, and all four of them instinctively backed up. "I chose this neighborhood for a reason," Michael continued, scanning each face systematically. "Low profile, no questions. People mind their business here, or they're supposed to." A car drove by, hip-hop thumping from its speakers, momentarily drawing their attention. When Jayden looked back, Michael had moved closer without making a sound. "In my previous occupation, situational awareness was essential." He gestured vaguely toward the building. "I've counted 6 surveillance blind spots in this complex alone. Noticed how the east stairwell door doesn't latch properly. Mapped 3 exit routes from every floor." A cold smile. Old habits. Marcus tried to laugh it off. "Man, what are you, some kind of spy or something?" Michael didn't laugh back. "Canadian. Joint Task Force 2. Before that, Royal Canadian Mounted Police Tactical Unit. Not the kind that rides horses." The words meant nothing to most of them, but Jayden recognized the terms from military documentaries he'd binged during a long summer. JTF-2, Canada's elite Special Operations Force, their equivalent of Delta Force or SEAL Team 6. "You're lying," DeShawn challenged, but his voice lacked conviction. Michael shrugged. "Believe what you want, but where I'm from, guys like you don't last long. Not because we hurt them." He paused. "Because we teach them better." Trey glanced at the others, uncertain. The dynamic had shifted completely. "All I wanted was to be left alone," Michael said. 20 years of service, 15 deployments. I've earned some peace." A police siren wailed in the distance, and Michael's eyes flicked toward the sound, assessing before returning to them. "So here's what happens now," he continued, his voice quiet but commanding. "You walk away, find someone else to bother, and we never have this conversation again." DeShawn, trying to save face, stepped forward. "Man, you don't tell us what to do around here. This is our—" Michael's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made DeShawn swallow the rest of his sentence. "Where I'm from," Michael said softly. "Guys like you don't last long." Marcus laughed, a forced sound that echoed hollowly in the parking lot. "Man, you watch too many movies. Canadian Special Forces? Yeah, right, probably just a security guard, with delusions." But his words lacked conviction, and his eyes kept darting to Michael's scarred hands. "Believe what you want," Michael replied, bending down to retrieve his groceries. "It changes nothing." The moment should have ended there. A natural conclusion, a diffusion of tension. But pride was a dangerous thing in neighborhoods like this. Respect, once lost, was nearly impossible to regain. "Nah," DeShawn stepped forward, blocking Michael's path. "You don't just come in here, threaten us, then walk away. That ain't how it works." Michael set his bags down again, this time with a sigh. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating facts." Jayden felt a growing unease. He'd seen this pattern before, confrontations that started with words and ended with ambulances. But something was different this time. The usual tension he felt before a fight was replaced by something closer to dread. "Whatever you were," Trey said, finding his courage in numbers, "don't matter here. This is our block." Michael's eyes flickered, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like disappointment. 4 teenagers against one middle-aged man, he observed calmly. "Those are your odds? That's the reputation you want?" His words struck a nerve with Jayden. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, like a teacher correcting a simple mistake. DeShawn pulled out his phone, thumbs flying across the screen. "I got cousins 2 blocks over. They'll be here in 5 minutes." Michael didn't react to the threat. Instead, he studied DeShawn with analytical detachment. "Escalation," he noted. "Interesting choice." Mrs. Winters appeared again, this time without her dog. She approached slowly, looking between the boys and Michael. "Everything all right here?" she asked, though her eyes said she knew it wasn't. "Fine," Michael assured her. "Just a discussion about neighborhood etiquette." She nodded, but lingered. Other residents had appeared too, faces in windows, figures on balconies, silent observers to the standoff. Marcus took a step toward Michael, fists clenched. "You think we're scared of you, one old man?" Michael remained perfectly still. Age is irrelevant. Experience is everything. The air between them practically vibrated with tension. Michael's gaze never wavered. "If you're gonna make a move," he said softly, "do it now. Otherwise, walk away." DeShawn's phone buzzed. His backup was on the way. The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Jayden saw Marcus's shoulders tense, recognized the telltale shift of weight that preceded a punch. "Don't," Jayden warned, but it was too late. Marcus lunged forward, fist arcing toward Michael's face, a punch that had dropped bigger men in neighborhood disputes. But it never landed. In one fluid motion, Michael pivoted slightly, his left hand deflecting Marcus's arm while his right gently but firmly guided the momentum past him. Marcus stumbled forward, off balance, confusion replacing anger on his face. No counterattack came. No painful takedown. Just an efficient redirection that made Marcus's aggression look clumsy, amateur. "That was option 1, Michael said calmly, returning to his neutral stance. There are 17 others I considered, most ending with you in significantly more pain. Trey and DeShawn froze, their bravado evaporating. Marcus regained his footing, face burning with humiliation. What the hell was that? He demanded. Economy of motion, Michael replied. You telegraphed your intention 3 seconds before you moved. Shoulders tensed, weight shifted, eyes fixed on target. He demonstrated the subtle tells as he spoke, then continued. In close-quarters combat, survival depends on energy conservation and threat assessment. You expended maximum energy for minimum effect. The clinical breakdown of Marcus's failure was somehow more devastating than any counterattack. We ain't in some combat class, DeShawn protested. Aren't you? Michael asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Every day in this neighborhood, who to challenge, who to avoid, when to stand your ground, those are tactical decisions. You're just making them poorly. 2 cars pulled up to the curb, and 4 older guys stepped out, DeShawn's cousins, Jayden presumed. The newcomers assessed the situation, noting the unusual stillness of the standoff. What's the problem? The tallest one called out. No problem, Michael answered before DeShawn could speak. Just a cultural misunderstanding being resolved. The confidence in his voice gave the newcomers pause. They approached cautiously, sensing something wasn't right with the scene. Michael stepped forward for the first time, and everyone, even the newly arrived backup, instinctively moved back. Your young friends, Michael addressed the cousins, have been testing boundaries. I've been patient. That patience has limits. The oldest cousin, wearing a faded Pistons jersey, looked between DeShawn and Michael, then frowned. This, the Canadian, Yar. Guy you texted about? The one you've been messing with? DeShawn nodded reluctantly. Jersey shook his head. Man, we talked about this. You can't just... He stopped mid-sentence as Michael turned his full attention to him, a moment of recognition passing between the 2 men. Military? Jersey asked quietly. Michael gave a slight nod. Iraq or Afghanistan? Both, among others. Jersey's posture changed immediately. All right, we're done here, he announced, grabbing DeShawn's shoulder. Let's go. What? No. He started this, DeShawn protested, but Jersey's grip tightened. No, you started this, Jersey corrected, and now we're ending it. Marcus wasn't ready to concede. You don't even know what happened. Jersey fixed him with a hard stare. I know enough. I know you don't mess with certain types of people. It ain't worth it. An understanding had formed between Jersey and Michael. The recognition that exists between those who have seen similar things, fought similar battles, even if on different sides of the world. You serve? Michael asked Jersey quietly. Marines. 2 tours in Helmand. Jersey nodded toward Michael. You got that look, the one that doesn't go away. DeShawn looked between them, confusion replacing his anger. What are you talking about? He's talking about the fact that your neighbor here isn't someone you want to antagonize, Jersey explained. Some people, you can tell by how they carry themselves. The other cousins had already started drifting back to their cars, the anticipated confrontation fizzling out before it began. Jayden, watching it all unfold, finally understood. This wasn't just about some Canadian guy they'd underestimated. This was about their complete misreading of the situation from the beginning. We should go, he said quietly to his friends. For a moment it seemed Marcus might resist, his pride too wounded to accept the defeat. But even he could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way Jersey and his cousins deferred to Michael without question, the watching neighbors who had emerged from their apartments, the feeling that they had stumbled into something far beyond their understanding. Yeah, whatever, Marcus muttered. This is boring anyway. As they turned to leave, Michael spoke one last time, his voice pitched so only they could hear. You boys aren't bad kids, he said. Just misguided. Channel that energy into something constructive. The world doesn't need more fighters. It needs builders. Trey scoffed, but Jayden caught the uncertainty in his eyes. Next time you think about testing someone, Michael continued, remember, appearances can be deceiving. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. He picked up his groceries, nodding to Jersey. Appreciate the assistance. Wasn't for you, Jersey replied. Was for them. They don't know how lucky they are. As they walked away, DeShawn couldn't resist one last question. What would you have done if we hadn't backed down? Michael's expression remained neutral. We're done here, he said simply. Unless you want this to go further. Something in his tone made it clear that further was somewhere none of them wanted to go. The following week brought a strange new normal to the apartment complex. The crew still hung out in their usual spots, but they gave Michael's door a wide berth. No more pranks, no more taunts. On Thursday afternoon, Jayden found himself alone in the laundry room when Michael entered, carrying a basket of clothes. Afternoon, Michael nodded, as if nothing had happened. Jayden nodded back, watching as the Canadian methodically sorted his laundry. The silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable. Your friend Jersey, Michael said finally. He's a good man, looks out for you. He's not really my friend, Jayden admitted. DeShawn's cousin. But yeah, he straightened us out a few times. Michael nodded. Veterans often do. They understand consequences in ways others don't. Jayden hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him. Were you really Special Forces? Michael considered the question while measuring detergent. Does it matter? I guess not, Jayden conceded. But you didn't seem scared, not even when we outnumbered you. Michael closed the washing machine and started the cycle before answering. Fear is useful when it's proportionate to the threat. I've faced worse odds. Around the complex, things had shifted. Mrs. Winters now brought Michael homemade bread every Sunday. The building manager suddenly fixed the security door that had been broken for months. Even the local dealers nodded respectfully when Michael passed. Word had spread. Not about what he'd done, but about what he could have done and chose not to. On Saturday, Michael was washing his car when Marcus walked by, alone. Their eyes met briefly. Marcus gave a slight nod. Not friendly, but acknowledging. Michael returned it equally. Later that evening, the crew gathered at their usual spot. The topic of conversation had changed from their Canadian neighbor to Jersey's offer to take them to the gym, maybe teach them some discipline. That guy was something else, Trey said, breaking their unspoken agreement not to discuss the incident. Probably exaggerated half that military stuff, DeShawn muttered, but without conviction. Jayden watched as Michael emerged from the building, nodded politely to neighbors, and drove away in his modest sedan. Nothing about him screamed dangerous. Nothing except that quiet confidence, the economy of movement, the watchful eyes that never fully relaxed. Nah, Jayden said finally. He was exactly what he said he was. We just didn't have the sense to see it. From her window across the street, Mrs. Winters smiled knowingly. She'd recognized it from the start, that in a neighborhood where everyone pretended to be dangerous, the truly dangerous one was the man who had nothing to prove. Turns out, the new guy wasn't the one who needed to be scared after all.